Jesus, I am overjoyed to meet you face to face. You've been getting quite a name all around the place. Healing cripples, raising from the dead. And now I understand you're God. At least that's what you've said.
Shalom, I'm Ryan Buchan and welcome to Backseat Filmmaker, the show where we let the real filmmakers do all the driving while we sit in the back and bitch about it. Thanks for joining me on this very special Easter episode. The Easter holiday means many things to many different people. Chocolate bunnies, the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and cascarones, those little hollow eggs filled with confetti that Mexican kids used to break on each other's heads. But for me, the Easter season means one thing: the celebration of one of my favorite film genres, the biblical epic. In 1927, Hollywood titan Cecil B. DeMille directed The King of Kings, a sprawling spectacle that chronicled the final days of Jesus of Nazareth in a very reverent, if traditional manner. Decades later, Martin Scorsese offered a very different and polarizing look at the life of Christ with 1988's The Last Temptation of Christ. The film was so controversial, it literally caused rioting around the world. Today I had the genuine pleasure of welcoming back my very first two guests on Backseat Filmmaker together for the first time, Mr. Joey Monroy.
What's up, Ryan?
And Connor Quade.
Hey.
So, Last Temptation of Christ, The King of Kings, obviously they use the life of Christ as the template, it's the basis, the same essential subject matter, but they're both vastly different takes on the same material.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really like silent movies. I mean, I've seen, the big ones. I saw, Wings won Best Picture, right? The first movie ever won Best Picture. I saw that back in the day. But I don't really search them out. I mean, I'll watch them when I'm cool with them, but I don't really, go out and look for silent movies to watch, usually.
So the opening sequence is done in two-strip Technicolor, which I think today, even in the surviving prints, it looks beautiful. So you're hooking the audience into the spectacle, the visual, the beautiful, sexy woman. With Jacqueline Logan, I believe, is the actress who plays Mary Magdalene. And you're sort of thrust into this world. And then from there, you segue into Jesus' hut as he's healing the sick. And Last Temptation is sort of the direct opposite of that, in that the first time you see Jesus, he's literally in a hut building a cross by himself. It's very
to
minimal.
Crucify one of God's followers, someone who's preaching God's word.
Crucify another Jew.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
it. And that's the lowest thing you could probably do at that time period as a Jewish man. But it definitely contrasts the two styles. Immediately you watch King of Kings, the first 5 minutes you're pulled in, you're in for a visual treat. Last Temptation of Christ, you go in there and it's much more minimalist. It's much more. It definitely feels like a much more indie take.
And the kind of blasphemous opening,
it's
his job.
Yeah.
And so, it does prepare you. You're right. They both prepare. One hooks you in, this is going to be kind of spectacle, but, we know what you're waiting to see. And then Martin Scorsese's like, hey, this is my movie, and you can leave now, because this is what it's going to be like.
The feeling begins. Very tender. Very loving. Then the pain starts. Claws slip underneath the skin and tear their way up. Just before they reach my eyes, they dig in.
And The King of Kings, I think is so beautiful. It's such a moving scene.
It's so well done.
And you see it from the little girl's point of view. It's black, and then it starts to dissolve. You see a beam of light, and that's when we see the face of Christ for the first time. She represents the audience. She's us. It's just here we are.
We were blind and now we see, but because of His word, there are layers to it.
It's such a beautiful scene, a beautiful way to introduce the Son of God, if you will.
And it's the complete opposite of the introduction in The Last Temptation of Christ, because, and I think there's a purpose to that. I think we're put in Jesus' shoes at the beginning of Last Temptation of Christ. We don't look up to him necessarily. We don't even look at him as an equal. We sort of look at him as a sort of
look down,
crazy guy, you know what I mean? Who's hearing voices, who's struggling with, going about his living in general.
And you have Willem Dafoe, of all people, cast as Jesus.
Yeah, exactly. Just his appearance,
I think you're really right about that, because Willem Dafoe, H.B. Warner, is that the name?
H.B.
Right?
Warner.
Yeah,
was
he
the
is
original
a
Jesus.
tall, like older, like kind of buff man. Like, at least he make him look tall. Like he's taller than everyone in all the frames.
He's an
like,
authority figure.
He's the
See
white.
him.
Like he stands like that. He like looks. You know, his hands are huge. And like
Yeah,
Willem
it's
Dafoe,
center frame.
yeah, center frame all the time, the light, and like it's just gorgeously done. And Willem Dafoe, like he's kind of short. I mean, he's like average height, and like he's shorter than Harvey Keitel.
And he's literally lying on the ground the first time we see him. He's
Yeah.
literally like face down on the ground. You know? what I
Yeah,
mean?
and like there's a lot of times where like when he's walking with his apostles, and like he's kind of at the side, and like I don't know, it's just. Like H.B. Warner is just such like
He's
he
the classic.
is the
He's the
Jesus.
definitive classic Jesus.
Like when you think of Jesus, like it is him. Like just the face and like the hair. I don't
just
know.
absolutely holy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Emanating
The
light.
way he's shot with all the light on him, his robe just glows, you know, and like Willem Dafoe's dirty and like just covered in blood and like
He's a hobo basically.
Yeah.
In that movie.
And it's funny, like I love Willem Dafoe as an actor. He's one of my favorite living actors by far. I think the man is a genius. And I mean, superficially, he does look like the traditional European Jesus. He has the light, long hair, the blue eyes,
yeah.
white Jesus. But at the end of the day, it's still Willem Dafoe. As much as I love him, at the end of the day, I grew up with Willem Dafoe as the Green Goblin and Spider-Man and Shadow the Vampire. Like he's just this creepy guy.
He is the Green Goblin, that's for sure.
Yeah, there are times where, you know, he's walking around the apostles and I'm just expecting him to say, "Avenge me, Harry!" Like, I'm expecting that Willem Dafoe almost. Because he's this sort of typecast for playing villainous or darker characters. And here you have him playing who's probably the most holy man in all of history.
I think it's a great turn too because he does play desperate very, very well. You know, something that you really wouldn't expect.
But he's so good in it, and that's the thing. It's just like you get past the looks and even the way he's being written as, like he does such justice to the material. He's so earnest and so genuine in the role.
Yeah, earlier on when he's starting to try to like gather up followers and preach the words of God and everything, you can tell that he's really trying to get the word out there. You can see the desperation in his face,
and it comes naturally. Like it's just you just see the way it flows. And I love the line in the film where they say, "Well, Rabbi, what are you going to say?"
I'll just open my mouth and God will do the talking.
and this is from somebody that made like gangster movies, city movies, you know, movies set in New York, like urban movies, and to set a movie in like the wasteland, you know, like a desert wasteland.
But it is gritty. It is gritty though. Like it's still there. Like I think like you can tell like he's from the city throughout the whole movie because like it's just everyone's close together. People are pushing each other. People are yelling at each other. Like there's still that grittiness there, even if it is like in another world.
He likes his crowd shots.
Were you guys familiar with Cecil B. DeMille's work as a filmmaker before watching The King of Kings?
I was aware of him as a director and as an important director, and I knew he had directed the Ten Commandments.
Yeah, I had Ten Commandments. Like, I mean, we all watched that since, way back, when we were little. But I just had no idea that he'd done so many movies. Like, just tons. Like, I just had no idea.
I don't think the importance of Cecil B. DeMille as a pioneer can be overstated. This was a man who literally founded the movie industry in Hollywood. Way back in 1914, 101 years ago, he directed The Squaw Man, which was the first feature film shot on location in Hollywood. And
He did it, dude. He went out there and made it, and like, I don't know, it's definitely not known as much as it should be, like his influence, definitely.
4 great loves have been told over and over again. Romeo and Juliet, Samson and Delilah, Tristan and Isolde, Antony and Cleopatra. 2 of these I have brought to the screen.
Cecil B. DeMille, as far as the public's perception of him, is a lot like Martin Scorsese in that both directors are sort of associated strongly with one genre. You have Martin Scorsese in the gangster film, and you have Cecil B. DeMille with the biblical epic. But if you look at both men's filmographies, that's really not true. Cecil B. DeMille, he directed historical epics, costume dramas, he did westerns, he did urban crime dramas, he did a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
But I guess when you make your mark on a certain genre and you just do such a good job in it, it is sort of hard to shake off that image.
They're varied filmmakers in the subject matter, but like their style is always like their style, like, I don't know, I respect that about them.
Now, as film lovers who aren't necessarily fans of silent films as a medium, What were your guys' thoughts on King of Kings?
I think the first thing that struck me was compositions and blocking are just so well done, and you can tell that he's practiced at it, that each frame is entertaining to watch, just in itself. His camera movement is really minimal, but I think he gets past that issue really well by making each shot stand out on its own right as just a beautiful thing to look at.
Yeah, it's not being the biggest fan of silent movies, just like the art of his shots is what made me really just respect it. It's just the art, you could tell it's not stagey, but you could tell he directed stage. There's so many extras, all these moving parts, everyone's doing something in the frame, no one's just standing there, everyone's positioned, and that, I love the art of his compositions, and the dialogue was really good. Or not the dialogue, but the inner titles, yeah. Just a lot of it was just straight up quotes from the verses, or it was.
And I like how he cites it. You see, okay,
I know, it was cool. It just it's kind of comforting, to see the quote, and then and the other inner titles just sound exactly like biblical dialogue, that you would read.
He was able to match it.
Yeah, and I respected that because it's not. I mean, you can't do that in talking movies. You can't have people talk like that for 2.5 hours. No one would care. No one would listen. So I thought that was cool that he used the silent medium for that kind of dialogue. I thought that was cool.
And the backgrounds of the inner titles always change throughout the movie,
yeah.
Depending on what trials and tribulations Jesus was going through. It always changed, and so was the titles were nice to look at too. Even so, I think it holds up too, just as a story, just on its own right.
Not even from a religious perspective, but I just find it's been very difficult to make a good Jesus movie. For instance, I think the greatest Jesus movie of all time is Ben-Hur, but that's only because Jesus is a peripheral character. His presence is felt throughout the film, but he's not the central focus.
Which is why it's the greatest Jesus movie ever, because you don't have to deal with all of the religious stuff. You just have his presence there, making it,
It's an amazing adventure story, and the message is still there. The message is so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to do a direct translation, it'll feel too much like a Sunday school lesson where it's just Jesus' greatest hits. Jesus in the desert, the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus, the loaves and the fishes, the crucifixion.
I think that's why when new takes Last Temptation and Passion of the Christ come out, it's such a huge deal. Everyone talks about it, everyone sees it, because people are interested in seeing a different way.
That's not even a debate. Did he exist? Did he not exist? At the end of the day, regardless, he's still one of those influential and controversial figures in human history.
His journey stands out. I think people like to see his story through the eyes of people brave enough to tell their own interpretation of it. Because, like I said, everyone does have their own feelings about it. So it's nice to see people really take it upon themselves to show a version that's never been shown before. Through their own eyes.
Yeah. And, with all respect to true believers, people who are devout Christians or believers in Jesus, you have to remember that the Gospels themselves were written decades after Jesus had died. And at least even in the canonical Gospels, the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all 4 of them differ in that they were slightly different interpretations of the same story. They weren't first-hand accounts. So when you take that into consideration, what makes these interpretations thousands of years later, does it make them any more valid? Does it make them less valid? Are they just another adaptation? Or is there some divine inspiration which makes these filmmakers want to tell the story the way they did?
I think it absolutely makes them valid, just because, especially back when Jesus was alive and everything, I'm sure everybody was hearing different stories about what he did or who he was or what sort of influence he had on the population. Exactly.
Yeah.
Everyone has their different story and everything, and I think it's a little bit indulgent to say that they know the exact version of it, because his influence is so singular and important, and what he died for is so important as well, that it's almost beside the point, how to interpret his entire journey.
These are men, Scorsese and DeMille, these are just men who just have thought about him a lot, and have heard the Gospels and probably have heard a lot of different perspectives about him, so they put it out there. I think that's valid because and especially in this day and age where, you know, it's like Jesus is with you, he's always with you, and whatever. So it's like, yeah, he is, and so I'm gonna, and like, this is what I think of it, basically.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. I'm sure you guys already knew this, but Martin Scorsese originally wanted to be a Catholic priest
Yes.
Yeah.
when he was growing up, and that sort of influenced a very interesting direction of his career. But there's those Catholic themes, I think, definitely run deep throughout his whole filmography, not just Last Temptation of Christ.
I'm sure he would have been a great priest, but I'm so glad he went the other way and made movies instead.
Thank you.
But you can see it in every single one of his movies. You can see his Catholicism in it, or at least the influence that Catholicism had on him. You can see why he's so interested in the figure, and leading up to the Last Temptation of Christ, you can sort of see that it was his own little journey that led to make that masterpiece.
Now, Last Temptation of Christ, it opens with a disclaimer of the film. It's letting the audiences know straight up, because I'm sure they got some notes from the studio heads early on, that this film, it's not an adaptation of the Gospels. It never pretends to be based on the Jesus of the Bible. It's a unique artistic interpretation of the novel, The Last Temptation of Christ, written by Nikos Kazantzakis. So with that in mind, Martin Scorsese has the sort of freedom to reinterpret it how he wants to. And I'm sure, I don't know if he regrets it now, but when it came out, it was a huge shitstorm of controversy. People were literally bombing, like in Paris, France, I believe, they were throwing Molotov cocktails into the theater, and people were burned and injured because of this film.
I just think that means that's when you know you made great art, though. You know, like when you can provoke a reaction like that, and like especially when he did it not to provoke, like he did it as like a Catholic man, and like he wanted to tell the story in like a very personal, different way, and like he didn't do it like to be sacrilegious, but when you watch it, you're just like, how did he not know? Like some of that stuff, you're just like, he had to have known, but like he had a disclaimer at the beginning, and like he's a Catholic, and like people got upset and like people were provoked, but like that just means that it did its job well, and like it, like you feel those emotions, and like just thinking about that stuff makes you feel these really deep things, which is exactly what he wanted to do. It's a very personal film, like all about emotions, you know.
And I think the people that got provoked, they got provoked mostly because of word of mouth about what the movie was going to be about. Because I know that people were inflamed about the movie even before it came out, even before anybody saw it. And so people heard stories about this, and people reacted to it in a really senseless way. I mean, there are scenes that are blasphemous, but I think that he defends Christ's sacrifice really well in literally the scene or the sequence of the Last Temptation, you know. And I think that's what people were really mad about. They heard that he was having sex with Mary, and that he had kids and everything.
He's making out with Judas.
And that he was living a normal human's life. But it's made clear that when the flame appears in the room where the apostles are sort of angry at him, that this is Satan. You know what I mean? And so
it's very clear about that.
And so I think that, from what I read, at least, I think that's what people were mostly mad about. And so he has that to defend the movie with.
But that's why I think Scorsese was wise in adapting this novel, because again, if you're going out there promising you're doing the true definitive Jesus movie, people have a right to get pissed off, but he was honest, he was upfront. And I think the best way to look at it, The Last Temptation of Christ is the cinematic equivalent of the DC Comics Elseworlds series. Now DC, for those of you that don't know, who aren't comic book geeks, DC Comics has a label called Elseworlds, which means these are stories that are out of the traditional continuity. So you could have Batman in Victorian England fighting Jack the Ripper.
Okay.
You could have Superman being raised in communist Russia. You can have this,
that's a good one.
Red Sun,
Red Sun, awesome.
You can have these wildly different, just fantastic takes on these amazing characters that are just as entertaining as stories and just as valid, but you can sort of free up the writers to do what they want to do.
What's that?
A wedding ceremony.
Who's getting married?
You are.
The temptation is beautiful because his temptation is not like women, it's not like power, it's living the life of a man and just having a family with like a woman who he loves. And like, I don't think that's blasphemous. I think it's like really
human.
Beautiful.
It's
and
human.
like the whole point of the movie, like you said from the very beginning, is that this is a human man who's also has this responsibility to the world. And the temptation is like, yeah, well, you could just ignore that responsibility and just live a happy life. And then when he chooses, you know, when he makes his choice, it's just that much more powerful.
It is accomplished!
Yeah. I think that in the H.B. Warner King of Kings, his sacrifice, it is just more like sad. You know, like it's like just his like that expression he has when he's getting like tortured and when they put the crown on him and like he's kind of walking, he's standing in front of the majority and they're all chanting for him to die and he's just like I just feel sorry for you guys. Like I'm sad. Like that mankind is like this basically.
Like he understands that humans are flawed, but he knows he accepts
he's just like I gotta do what I have to do. But like that's more like sympathetic. But I think Willem Dafoe's is more powerful because I mean it's just
they're powerful in different ways. I don't even like that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but like I think they are powerful in different ways. But like just in how I feel about the movies, I just think like seeing what he could have had and him giving it up and like him living the life and realizing like that stuff. I just think that like just making the sacrifice more personal than more worldly, But I just respond to that more. But I think like both of them are done really well, and both of them are acted out really well. It's just they just have different intentions, and like you just connect with one more than the other, or you connect with both. But.
And you get the idea that in the King of Kings version, Jesus like lives on after he dies. You know what I mean? There's his image is even shown towering over cities and everything. So he is very much a presence, you know what I mean? Whereas in the Last Temptation of Christ,
The Last Temptation of Vincent Price.
I know, right? In the Last Temptation of Christ, the screen doesn't go to black. It has those flickers and everything, but the movie literally ends right there. And so you do get the idea that his death was definite. You know what I mean? I think they're both the way that was handled. They're both very reflective of their times. You know, I mean, if you watch The King of Kings, that ending. It's very, everything's very practical, you know what I mean? You get a very good idea of how movies were made back then and how everything looked back then, how they used like miniature sets and they destroy those and everything. Whereas if you see Scorsese's movie, you know that it's a movie made in the modern age because of how much camera movement there is in it and everything. And so it's a really good example of how movies have changed, like as time goes on, and how people make movies changes with that.
Yeah, and the modern, it's just like the incredible score by Peter Gabriel. Like the modern, it's just so everything about it is ultra modern, and like including this crazy experimental score by an experimental music artist who came on. Like somebody who doesn't really even score films, like.
Again, just like Martin Scorsese's style is almost like the anti-Cecil B. DeMille. You have what Peter Gabriel's doing. It's almost like the anti-Miklos Rocha. Miklos Rocha was known for his big, epic, symphonic score. Ben-Hur, the 1961 version of King of Kings.
Yes.
So many
great score. That's a great score.
That's a beautiful score, and like Miklos Rocha, one of the greatest composers of all time. I'm not debating that.
Maybe the greatest.
But I think it's illustrative of Martin Scorsese's approach and Peter Gabriel's approach. They're like, look, Cecil B. DeMille, he did it right the first time. He made this incredible movie. I know I can't top it, but just take it in a completely different direction. Alright, so Scorsese, DeMille, what makes these two versions stand out from all the other Jesus movies? Because obviously the biggest one in our lifetime, Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ.
I mean, I would say Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ, definitely it has the same amount of passion as King of Kings and Last Temptation. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But I think that King of Kings is the definitive Jesus movie. All the scenes got. Last Temptation is the definitive deconstruction of Jesus movie. The Passion of the Christ is what? The definitive violent Jesus movie, the definitive horrific Jesus movie. It shows his the violence and what he went through. But what does that mean? It doesn't really mean a lot.
If you don't have context, if you don't know who Jesus is, you're just watching this poor innocent man getting tortured for 2 hours. And
it's still powerful. I'm not saying it's not a powerful movie. It's a very powerful movie. The images, but I think compared to the King of Kings, Last Temptation, it doesn't have that ultimate kind of benchmark of greatness. this. Like,
there are very deliberate choices in the movie that make it their own, like the spectacle in The King of Kings or The Last Temptation.
The
in
intimacy.
and The Last Temptation of Christ, which I don't think The Passion of the Christ has.
I mean, do you think Passion of the Christ like holds up to the other two?
I appreciate it aesthetically. The music, the sound, the set design, the cast, everything is on point, except for the segment of the story that Mel Gibson decided to tell.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have this epic canvas to choose from. There's a lot you can take, but he decided to choose the most, I guess, superficial section. Like the death of Christ, it's easy to exploit that and make it really horrific to generate a response out of an audience, which obviously it did. But if you're just going into it as a film, you know, it has none of the heart, it has none of the redemption. You certainly don't feel better about yourself walking out of that movie. It's an incredibly depressing, exhaustive experience, which, to Mel Gibson's credit, that's exactly what he set out to make. But as far as being entertained or being moved, you know, I don't get the same reaction out of The Passion of the Christ like I do with something like The Ten Commandments. It's just a completely night and day movie-going experience. But I admire what he was trying to do.
Yeah. I think that's true. It's not nearly as moving, I think, as King of Kings or Last Temptation. Because I think King of Kings, like, it does feel dated, it does feel kind of like a Sunday school sermon, but, like, at the end, like, you feel like this is what Jesus is, and, like, this is what people, like, want. Like, the devout, like, I mean, this is, like, what people think of him, like, what people have thought of him for centuries, you know?
Yeah.
And you feel like you understand, like, okay, this is the epitome of Jesus, like the myth, like Jesus the legend, like this is it, you know.
And the thing is, like we take it for granted. We're so fickle nowadays, as our generation is, with Netflix, iPhones, whatever. I sound like an old man, but you have to keep in mind the impact King of Kings had back in 1927.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a famous account that in the 20s, when they were showing this film in Mexico, like when they were road showing it in these little villages. These peasants, these poor people that go watch the film, just to, you know, I'm sure some of them didn't read, that they were seeing this story unfold before their eyes, that you would have people in the audience literally go to the screen and kiss the feet of H.B. Warner's Jesus. Like, that's how moved. It really was a deeply spiritual experience for that audience as it was for DeMille creating it. So I guess the ultimate question is, do Last Temptation and King of Kings, if you know nothing about Jesus, if you're not religious, if you're an atheist, if you live in the deepest, darkest corner of the world, and you know nothing about this concept or this religion, can you go into either of these films and appreciate them as standalone movies?
Yeah. I mean, I think you can. I think it's. I think characters in both movies go through very particular arcs that are easy to follow and very identifiable. As like their own stories, that it's easy to identify with the characters, with the story, with everything they're being told, and you get an idea of the sacrifice of Jesus in The Last Temptation and the sort of holiness and greatness of the Jesus in King of Kings.
King of Kings, DeMille's art. Like, even if you are an atheist, like, you can't deny the art. Last Temptation, the journey of the character of Jesus, like, the way he changes, the Last Temptation, like, there's power there.
Scorsese's art.
Yeah, exactly, and, like, there's a power there, and, like, his style is not, I mean, like, his style is just as, like, in your face as DeMille's in different ways, you know? So, like, I just think, like, even if you're an atheist, you're not religious, like, these, I mean, like, you could say King of Kings is, like, propaganda or whatever, but you have to remember the time period, what people wanted, and stuff.
But I think it transcends that.
It does. No, it's just influential. But, like, I just think, like, those movies stand alone. Whereas, like you said, Passion of the Christ, if you don't bring the emotional investment, you're not going to get any out of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And the thing is, look, I don't think you have to be religious just because, look, I don't practice the ancient Norse religion, but I love the Thor movies. I think Chris Hemsworth is fantastic in the role, and they're entertaining movies for what they are.
And he looks like the Thor that I would picture in my head, you know? Like, it's just like H.B. Warner and King of Kings. Like, I mean, that looks like the Jesus that, like, you would picture, you know? Like, I don't know. It's similar.
So on that note, you guys, thank you so much for coming on the show and having this discussion with me.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, thank you. I enjoy it, yeah.
All right. Peace be with you.
Yeah.
And also with you.
Thank you very much.
With you, sir.
Thanks. And thank you guys for sitting in on our little conversation. I hope it's motivated you to go out and check out King of Kings and Last Temptation of Christ, and even more, go check out the work of Cecil B. DeMille and Martin Scorsese if you haven't seen some of their other great films. They're amazing filmmakers, and I really hope this can be a gateway to that.